very lucky today to have Dean Brenner come and speak to us about Alzheimer's. And he's got a very impressive Alzheimer's and other kinds of dementia. He's got a very impressive resume of activities that he's got a very impressive resume of activities and places he's worked with and volunteered with, and he came to share his knowledge with us. Some things I'm sure we're going to learn that we assumed we knew, but he's going to teach us that we didn't really know. So I think it should be very informative. I'm just going to go through quickly, and I have to read this because it's this so long I can't remember it all. He chairs the board of the Alzheimer's Association for the National Capital Area. He is the vice chair of the Alzheimer's Association on the National Board of Directors. He also serves as chairman of the DC Branch Health Advisory Coalition, and which is a coalition of community stakeholders organized by the DC Health to work together. DC Health to work together with the advice of the DC government and the Alzheimer's and other brain health issues in DC. So he's got a depth of local information that if we have any questions after, and need any direction for information where to go, he's a great resource. Welcome, Dean.
Thank you, Jean. First of all, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So, so here's this is what I'm not going to talk about, which is also an important topic, the rabbinic search. If you have a question about that, and it's totally unrelated to Alzheimer's, you can talk to Betsy, who was kind enough to be here today. So I'm going to go through some background for all of you on Alzheimer's. I'm not a doctor and I'm not a scientist, but I learned about Alzheimer's through the School of Hard Knocks. My mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. I found out, not from the doctor, and there's a whole story about that, in 2015. And I couldn't spell Alzheimer's, did not know anything about it. My mom lived in New Jersey. Did not know anything about healthcare in Monmouth County, New Jersey. The whole thing was just a giant train wreck. And from there, my mom couldn't tell me what kind of help she needed, and she needed all kinds of help. So for a while, I did this whole thing by myself. I have two brothers. Like in many families, they were kind of hiding under the table from it. And then eventually it got to be the help and my mom wouldn't accept any help. I had kind of some secret help. And then that got to be not enough. And again, did not know, because of the fact that I hadn't gone to a meeting like this, I had no idea what to do, didn't know about an Alzheimer's Association, and I wasn't looking for big national help or regional help. I needed help in her town of 17,000 people in suburban New Jersey. So long story short, I Googled started Googling around about Alzheimer's and found out, oh my God, there's this group, the Alzheimer's Association. Okay, but are they in New Jersey? Are they anywhere near Matawan? And it turned out that there was a social worker who I spoke with in the South Jersey chapter, and that one conversation was transformational for the rest of my mom's life. And so then from there, my journey continued as I thought one night, worrying about her, gee, I wonder if the Alzheimer's Association is in DC. Do they do lobbying or anything? I could do that, and that led to my volunteer involvement both in the DC area and nationally. So by the way, let's just raise your hand if you know anyone in your family or a friend who has or had Alzheimer's. Right. When I asked that question in the history of the world, no one's ever said Alzheimer's, what's that? Right. So I knew that in Temple Micah that all the hands would probably go up, or most of them. And of course, it's hard to find, we don't wear a badge that says Alzheimer's. So, I asked the Lunch and Learn Committee if I could come and give a talk. Thanks so much to Jean, to Jerry, to everyone who runs the Lunch and Learns. And so here we are. So I'm going to go through some information about Alzheimer's, and then please, the most important part of this is your questions, and I promise I will stay here as long as it takes to answer everybody's questions, and I will not, if anything I say is confusing or in any way you don't understand, let's make sure that everyone leaves here with a good understanding of Alzheimer's. And there are two parts to the Alzheimer's story. So here's the tough part is Alzheimer's is devastating. Alzheimer's is terrible. There are 7 million people, more than 7 million people in the United States over the age of 65 who have it. There are 14 million or more people struggling to try to take care of them, and there's no cure. And most doctors, despite, I'm going to give you a lot of information, most doctors today still are reluctant to diagnose it, aren't up to speed about it. So many things are happening. I'll tell you about stuff that happened last week. And, it's just the healthcare system is hard to conquer. So it is tough. The second part, though, is we're making huge progress. It's true there's no cure for Alzheimer's. There are two drugs that can now be given to people if they're diagnosed in an early enough stage, and these drugs slow the decline. They slow the decline by years, we now know. And everything about Alzheimer's is hard. So these drugs today are mostly given by infusion. So you have to take a person to an infusion center. Getting a diagnosis is still extremely hard. We're making huge progress. Another part of this, which I'll talk about, is how do you diagnose someone with Alzheimer's? Originally, it was always done by an autopsy. That was the only way you could actually get a diagnosis. And today, first of all, you can have a scan of your brain. Of course, very scary. It's a special kind of scan called a PET scan. A lot of people, including my mom, don't want to get that. They could also look at your spinal fluid. Again, painful. It's really like, having an outpatient operation, hard. So today we actually have two blood tests approved by the FDA. And these blood tests are looking for a chemical that equates to Alzheimer's with, 95, 98, 98, 99% certainty. So now, of course, will Medicare cover, lots of questions about this. Will Medicare cover a blood test? Will your doctor give it to you? What do you have to do to be able to convince a doctor that, hey, I really want to get the blood test? I promise I'll get into all of it. But again, for Alzheimer's, it's really a good news, bad news story. And so much more work to do, so many more doors to knock, so much more scientific research to be done. But we know if I was giving this presentation 4 years ago, I could have done it in 5 minutes because there are no drugs, there's no blood tests, there's diagnosis. The doctor for my mom basically just said, you seem like a nice guy, you seem like a good son, really sorry, good luck. And, that conversation can still happen today, but hopefully, especially with what I'm going to show you, more and more people are actually not having a conversation like that, and they're getting help. So let's dig into this. Oops. Here we go. All right, so there are way too many by the way, if you want to move your chairs so you can see, because I don't mean to block anyone. So there are all kinds of facts and figures on this slide, but again, I'll just try to boil it down that there are over 7 million people who live over the age of 65. Okay, now let's talk about DC, Maryland, and Virginia. The Alzheimer's Association estimates that about 950,000 people in DC, Maryland, and Virginia are impacted by Alzheimer's, including roughly 350,000 people who have it and roughly 600,000 people who are struggling to take care of them. But then let's go down the next, let's zero in even more in DC. So if DC were a state, which I know is a big if, but let's just pretend with me that DC was a state, DC would have the highest percentage of people over 65 with Alzheimer's of all 50 states. And I'll explain why in a sec. Maryland is the most prevalent state. And Prince George's County and Baltimore City are tied for fourth in the country. So the reasons for that, we don't know how many people, we don't know to a moral certainty how many people have Alzheimer's. These are estimates that are done. So Rush University in Chicago follows a cohort of people. It's like 15,000 people. And they follow how many of them are diagnosed with Alzheimer's, how many of them are in an early stage, and what are their demographic characteristics. So here are the facts about Alzheimer's. First of all, 2/3 of the people who have it are women. We don't know why that is. If you're African American, you're twice as likely as someone who's white to get Alzheimer's. Again, we do not know why that is. And if you're Hispanic, you're 1.5 times as likely as a white person to get Alzheimer's. So these researchers can put all that all those demographics together, and again, by following this cohort of people, and then they can make estimates using that. So in DC, we're fortunate. We have a lot of African American women who are over the age of 65, flashing red light. That means there's a lot of Alzheimer's in the District of Columbia. Same thing with, in PG County. Now, another part of this whole problem is how much Alzheimer's costs in America. So you can see on the chart, it says in 2025, Alzheimer's and other dementias will cost the country $384 billion. That's Medicare, Medicaid, private paying, if you combine it. And if we don't find a cure by 2050, it will cost more than $1 trillion. But then, take that down to just each person, right? So, when they talk about cutting Medicaid, Medicaid pays for long-term care. I'm sure a lot of people here know that. Not Medicare, it's Medicaid. So cuts to Medicaid, that's cutting our people. That's cutting services for people who have Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia. So let me also now zoom back and talk about a question that always comes up, which is what's the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia? And often people use those two terms interchangeably, and sometimes they're not even really sure what the difference is. So you can think of dementia as an umbrella term. It's an umbrella term basically for any disease that results in a loss of memory and other cognitive abilities. And then you can think of the different kinds of dementia. Alzheimer's is the most prevalent. There's one that's not even listed there, Parkinson's disease, Parkinson's-related dementia, vascular dementia, Lewy body dementia, frontal temporal, Huntington's, and people can have more than one form of dementia. They can have Alzheimer's and vascular dementia. And often, even after a person has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, after more exams and closer scrutiny, it may turn out actually they have one of the other forms of dementia, not Alzheimer's. So, by the way, the Alzheimer's Association, which is the world's largest organization advocating for people with Alzheimer's, also equally is advocating for people who are suffering for all these other forms of dementia. So all the supports that that you'll hear me talk about apply just as much for other forms of dementia as they do to Alzheimer's. Okay, so now let's zero in on Alzheimer's. So there actually are two biological hallmarks of Alzheimer's. So if you look at the brain, when they do a scan of someone's brain, if they have Alzheimer's, here's what you see in the scan. There's a buildup of a plaque. A plaque, it's in clumps when they look at the scan. plaque is a protein called amyloid. So you might hear this in the news when they talk about the drugs. You might hear amyloid plaque. That's this plaque that builds up. Almost every person who has Alzheimer's has that. And then there's a second protein called tau. And when they look at the brain of a person, the tau is in tangles. It's not in straight lines. It's all like twisted. It looks actually like kind of a worm. So, how do they diagnose someone as having Alzheimer's? Sure, there would be a cognitive exam. Maybe, hopefully all of us get the cognitive exam, repeat the 3 words back, all sorts of tests like that. But then eventually a neurologist, a specialist would order a blood test, as I mentioned, and the blood test would look for biomarkers, would look for chemicals that equate to high amyloid in your brain. Or, as I said, they would do a scan or they would look at your spinal fluid. So other aspects. So here's what Alzheimer's is not. Okay, I don't remember where I left my keys. I can't find my wallet. I don't remember my 3rd grade teacher's name. I mean, those are, could be evidence of deeper memory loss issues. Usually with Alzheimer's, it's really short-term memory. It's not long-term memory. My mom could tell the story of how my parents met in infinite detail perfectly, but then short-term issues that she just couldn't deal with. But it's more than just memory. It's thinking, it's behavior. And, the thing with Alzheimer's, and the slide says they gradually worsen over the years. My own experience is someone with Alzheimer's will be the same for a while, and then there'll be a decline, and then maybe the same, and then kind of another decline. Here's what will happen. Someone with Alzheimer's will never get better. It's either the same or worse. And even with the drugs, which do work, and I'll talk about them, they provide a benefit, but it's the absence of it getting worse. It's not necessarily things getting better. And there are stages of Alzheimer's, and now we know this plaque, it builds up over a couple decades. It doesn't just, it's not just an overnight thing. And so we know that for 20 or 25 years, the plaque is building up. And one of the things that's on the horizon is, so far the drugs have been tested on people who are already symptomatic. It's clear they have Alzheimer's. But we're now testing the drugs with people who are not symptomatic yet, but they have the high plaque. And if the drugs will work, i.e. if they will delay the onset of Alzheimer's, wow, that would be a huge step forward. So you can look, when the news of that study, of those studies come out in the 2027, 2028 timeframe, and unfortunately all this stuff takes time, that would be a major step forward. And as the slide says, individuals will, as the disease progresses, individuals will need around-the-clock care. That's certainly my own experience. So here's a little bit more information about the drugs. So as I say, there's no cure, and these 2 drugs are called Leqembi and Kisunla, and what they are is antibodies. Remember the antibodies as a cure for COVID. These antibodies target the plaque, and it's a little complicated. The plaque is like 5 different kinds of molecules, and we're not exactly sure which of them is more toxic, okay? And the 2 drugs basically seem to be performing about the same. They're each targeting different molecules of the plaque, and they will remove the plaque, but the plaque grows back. So for Leqembi, there's already a maintenance. So these drugs are given over 18 months, as I mentioned. Now they're given by infusion. Leqembi, they've applied to just give it by injection, which would be so much easier for people. And they're both, there is going to be like a maintenance dose. And actually, Leqembi can already be given the maintenance dose by injection. And so what these drugs do is they generate an immune reaction in your brain to knock out the plaque, to clear the plaque. But that's not game over because, as I said, the plaque will grow back. So someone would continue on the drugs. So the initial testing for these drugs, is in a small group of people, a couple hundred people probably, and it's only over 18 months. And so there were a lot of scientists, Alzheimer's experts, who were very skeptical about these drugs because they thought, well, gee, it's kind of a marginal benefit. They're certainly not a cure. And they sort of looked down their nose and said, it's not that much of a benefit. Of course, if it was your mom or dad who had Alzheimer's, you would take any benefit, right? And extending preventing the decline by a year, by 5 months would be a huge deal. So the good news is that now we have more experience with these two drugs because it's been now 4 or 5 years since that initial 18-month study. And so there are more people that are on the drugs. And so we have more real world experience. How are the drugs really working? And the good news is, as I said, they could even prevent the decline. It isn't for a few months. It's now 4 years, 5 years, 6 years. So it's a big deal. Unfortunately, right now, if you went to your doctor and said, hey, some guy at Temple Micah told me about this drug called Leqembi, I'd wager money, maybe, unless your doctor is an Alzheimer's expert, he or she probably doesn't even know about them. There are about 15,000 people in the United States that are on these drugs today. And hopefully, as we have more presentations like this and more doctors get experience with them, that number is going to grow exponentially. Now, the trickiest part of the drugs, which I haven't mentioned yet, is they can only be given to people if the plaque hasn't grown too much. So the experience is if, you can think of like a cancer with a tumor. If the tumor is too large, they don't give you chemotherapy. They say it's too late. So with these drugs, it's the same thing. If the plaque is in too advanced of a stage, and when they do the scan, they actually have a scoring system for how much of the plaque is there. And if it's above a certain level, the drugs won't work. It's too late. So as I say in the slide, this is why early diagnosis for people who have Alzheimer's is now crucial. It's the difference between getting a drug that will really help them and not. So what do you do? Where would you go for information about the drug? You can go to the Alzheimer's Association website, alz.org/treatments, or you can call the Alzheimer's Association 24/7 helpline, which you see there, 800-272-3900. Now, having said all that, I guarantee you that on the helpline, they're going to say, we don't give medical advice. And they're absolutely going to say, go to your doctor and ask your doctor about it. So, but you all have a different resource. You have me, so you can call me. And I'm very connected with the Alzheimer's. Of those 15,000 people who are on the drugs, a non-trivial percentage of them have some connection to the Alzheimer's Association. I'm very connected with the scientific staff, and we can see what we can do. So as I say in the slide, early detection is now so important. It's the difference between being able to qualify for a drug and not. So, pay attention to changes in memory. I think everyone kind of instinctively connects Alzheimer's with memory, but it's really thinking, behavior, things that are unusual. In hindsight, I was a little late with my mom. Now, it didn't matter because these drugs didn't exist in her day, but there were some financial things going on. And in hindsight, that is that was a marker of Alzheimer's. In addition, my mom had severe hearing loss. That puts someone at risk of Alzheimer's. And also, she lived in the same house I grew up in by herself, had very little social contact, was really very isolated. These are all textbook signs of Alzheimer's. So like I'm such an expert. I'm not an expert at all. I mean, all of that was happening right in front of me. And still, when I found out, I didn't take action. And taking action within a family, of course, is like the hardest thing in the world, right? Because, I relate to my brothers and vice versa as if we were 6 years old, right? We all know that. A lot of baggage in a family. So, you know, try to speak up in a family, turn to a friend, bring in a doctor who is willing to help. You can call the Alzheimer's Association helpline and they'll give you some ideas about it. But the headline here is do not do nothing. When you see something unusual, because it's not getting better if it's Alzheimer's, there's no such thing. So if there's something unusual, and again, okay, forgetting where my keys are, not remembering where my wallet is, but, things that are far more fundamental than that, speak up, take the risk, blame it on me. So there's a little brochure that I think is up your table, but basically the 10 warning signs of Alzheimer's, again, memory loss, but it's so much more than that. Challenges in planning or solving problems. I saw that with my mom in spades. Difficulty completing tasks, confusion with time and place, trouble understanding visual images and spatial relationships. Personality and mood changes, that was a big thing with my mom. Withdrawal from work or school activity, social activities. I saw that one of my mom's best friends passed away, and my mom called me, told me about it, and said she wasn't going to the funeral. I'm like, wait, what? This is like your friend for 60 years? How come? Mom, I'll come. I'll drive to New Jersey. We're going to the funeral. But that was, again, close to the time when she was diagnosed. Decreased her poor judgment, misplacing things and unable to retrace steps. I would emphasize unable to retrace steps. And then, of course, new problems, speaking or writing words. And, don't wait for all 10, okay? If you see one of these, again, speak up. If it turns out that it's nothing, no harm, no foul, that's great. Yeah, yeah, thanks. So the people in the Zoom can hear. So how do we prevent Alzheimer's? I mean, it's so terrible, and we have medicine that is on where we're making some progress, but, the holy grail would be, let's just get rid of this horrible disease. So the Alzheimer's Association, so let me back up. If you just Google how to be healthier, they will say exercise. They will say eat a better diet, get sleep. There are these obvious things that will prevent diabetes, heart disease, just to live a healthier life. So the Alzheimer's Association and various researchers around the world looked at those things and they said, okay, but can we actually prove scientifically that they will prevent Alzheimer's? Because, these are things that everyone, in the world is always saying, and okay, it's a way to live a healthier life, but do they actually prevent Alzheimer's? What can we do to prevent Alzheimer's? So the Alzheimer's Association and the National Institute of Health, which funds the two major funders of Alzheimer's research in the world, we funded a study called US Pointer. And there were 4,000 people around the country, and many of them had a family connection to Alzheimer's. Some of them had a genetic connection to Alzheimer's, and we can talk about that. And they were obese. They did not get exercise. Most of them lived kind of socially isolated lives. And so they divided the 4,000 people into two groups. One group was called the structured group. And so they were put on a program of, cognitive exercise for 3 times a week for 30 minutes, do crossword puzzles, be engaged socially. They were put on a strict Mediterranean diet. They were in a rigorous exercise program. All these things were supervised. And then once every 2 weeks, they would do a check-in. And all their health information would be recorded. That was group one. Then group two was told to do these things, but kind of on their own. They weren't supervised. No one was checking up on them. So then the results of the study were astonishing. They just came out a couple months ago. And the results were that, yes, based on the biomarkers for, the level of plaque, the people who were in the group one, in the structured group, it looked like they're less advanced in the development of Alzheimer's. It looked as if the structured exercise will prevent the onset of Alzheimer's. And then even for the group that wasn't structured, where it was just kind of on their own. And I think there was a little bit of a stigma, they're in a group, so different people are talking, well, did you exercise today? I mean, I think there was some of that. And even in that group, there was still a benefit. There was still a preventative benefit. So now it isn't just the same old stuff that you hear for every disease in the world. There's actually science that shows that these mechanisms do work. Now, of course, there'll be more research. Actually, NIH did 2 follow-up studies that were released last week, and it showed that these people in the structured group also had lower blood pressure and fewer incidents of sleep apnea. So what can you do with all that information? So the Alzheimer's Association, if you go to alz.org, Habit Builder, and by the way, Jerry and Barbara Diskin are going to send out these slides. So don't worry, you don't have to remember any of this. But there's a new tool that the Alzheimer's Association created called Habit Builder, a brain health habit builder. And you go on a little website and you enter in information about yourself. How often do you exercise? What's your blood pressure? What's your diet? Kind of just basic information. And then using the results of the US Pointer study, you get back a program. Hey, do this, do this, do this. And it isn't just something that, when you go to your doctor says, well, it'd be better if you ate better. It's actually derived from scientific research. So that is a really good resource. And then there's an app for everything. So there's an Alzheimer's app, right, called My Alz Journey. And I mean, there's an app, you might think no big deal. But what I will just say, and I'm curious if other people in the room feel this way, I mentioned that when I was taking care of my mom, I really felt alone. I was just driving up to New Jersey and back doing this whole, mega thing by myself. And I think most caregivers who are caring for someone with Alzheimer's feel that. They feel alone. So how do they connect with others? I didn't know how to do that, and I never did do that until now, years after my mom passed away. So what the app does is it connects you to the local Alzheimer's Association chapter. It connects you with support groups. It connects you with other people who are going through this horrible disease so that, you don't have this feeling that you're alone. And then one thing that I'm very proud of is it says on the slide there, built with input from people living with dementia and care partners. That's a huge thing. So there was, when it was in beta stage, it was tested and refined, but not by people like you and me, by people who had Alzheimer's. So someone with Alzheimer's, actually can use the app and would get a benefit out of it. Okay, so just for the Zoom crowd, someone just asked, where do you get it? So you would go on the App Store on an iPhone or on the Android Google Play Store, and you would just download it into your phone. It's called My Alz, and someone just asked, what is it called? It's called My Alz Journey. So then the last thing, and I mentioned this earlier, so there is a 24/7 helpline that the Alzheimer's Association maintains, 800-272-3900. Let me say that slower, 800-272-3900. And it is like master's level social workers and other experts. They support, 35 different languages, and it's, a tremendous resource for people. And then another thing that's mentioned there is trial match. So let me just explain what that is. So as I said, the National Institute of Health is the largest funder of Alzheimer's research in the world. They fund 3.8, they're supposed to this year fund $3.8 billion of research. And we're very upset about certain things that are going on there, and we could talk about that. But they fund, and we, the Alzheimer's Association, this year, we're going to fund more than $112 million in research, which is a huge amount of money, and we get that from, our grassroots, people like you and me, going to walks, raising money in 100 different ways. So the result of that funding, it's that it supports clinical trials. So all of these drugs are tested through clinical trials, and there's kind of a two-sided problem to the clinical trials. So if you're someone with Alzheimer's, like clinical trial, where do I go? And is there one near me? And how would I find something like that? And then if you're the researcher, you need X hundred or X thousands of people for the clinical trial. Where do I find volunteers? How do I get people to fill up the trial cohort? Because if I can't fill it up, then the trial doesn't go forward. So trial match is, you can find on the Alzheimer's Association website, alz.org. And it's, we're Jews, we can appreciate this. It's a matchmaking service where the people who are looking for people for their trials meet up with people who have Alzheimer's and are looking to be in a trial. That is the slides that I had for all of you. I hope that is a good overview. And now I'm very anxious to answer your questions.
Dean, I'll deliver the mic to whoever you identify.
Okay. How about Barbara? Oh, no, you know what? Let's start with Martha, because we'll get you next, Barbara.
Can you, or do you know what the, how well primary care providers are educated in recognizing signs of early dementia in their patients? What kind of education is happening there?
Yeah, so not well enough, certainly, but there is a lot of education. So there's something called Project Echo, which is an online, it relates to not just Alzheimer's, but all diseases. And it uses kind of a spoke and hub model to get the word out about new diagnoses and new treatments. And so Alzheimer's is a major hub for Project Echo, because primary care doctors are busy people. They're not going to come to a meeting like this, and they read a million different journal articles. So the thing that we rely on is Project Echo as a way, and it isn't just for primary care doctors, although that's important, but in a lot of neurology groups, they use PAs, and a lot of the PAs do the screening before, it can take months to get in to see the neurologist. So usually it all starts with an appointment with the PA for screening. So they have to be experts in making a diagnosis. And so a lot of the Project Echo work is with them.
Dean, could you hold your mic closer? Yes. Your voice is strong, but okay, the mic is better.
Got it. Okay, now Barbara.
My name is Barbara Diskin. My question is whether Medicare pays for periodic screenings for people who don't already have a diagnosis.
Okay, great question. The first step is Medicare didn't want to pay for these drugs at all. Too risky, too uncertain, marginal benefit. Remember, I said there were some doctors that felt that way. So I was part of a group of advocates. We advocated in DC, we advocated all over the country. We had marches at all the HHS regional offices. And the good news is we prevailed, and the CMS, the Biden CMS, they decided to cover the drugs. For the screening, not yet. And so there's a bill called the ASAP Act that we're lobbying for, which we were instrumental in getting introduced to make sure that all these biomarker screening tests are covered by Medicare. And obviously, Medicare is going to save a fortune if they cover these drugs, because if they, again, doing nothing is not an option here. It's only going to get much worse. So you're right at the reactor core there, Barbara. The Alzheimer's Association, we do a lot of lobbying on a bipartisan basis, and I've been involved with that. And we're lobbying to make sure that Medicare will cover the screening. Russ?
Thank you. A couple of questions that are related. You mentioned the fact, that Alzheimer's is progressive. And I guess my question is, the time frame of the progression. Are we talking about weeks, months, years, decades? The second related question is, you referred to drugs that are now approved, which can delay progression. Again, are we talking about significant delays? And third, can you talk a little bit about the unpleasant side, the side effects of the infusion drugs?
Yeah. So let me try to take that in the order of your questions. Thank you. That was very logically laid out. So Alzheimer's is progressive, certainly over decades. It's progressive even before a person has symptoms. And so, yeah, this isn't something that happens in a week, a month, 6 months, or anything like that. It's something that happens over the long term. Then the next question is the benefit of the drugs. So when the drugs were initially tested in the clinical trials, remember I said it's a smaller group of people who are doing the tests. The difference between someone in the placebo group and someone who had the drug is what we measure. And the person who was getting the drugs on average had declined by 30% less than the person in the placebo group. So that's why people like me, when doctors, and I kind of think they're really kind of in the Flat Earth Society, but the doctors who said it's no big deal, it's not much of a benefit, I think that's nonsense. I think 30%, anyone who's ever dealt with Alzheimer's would say that's huge. And then what's happened is that's just over 18 months. And as I said, in an 18-month period, even the placebo group, it's not really declining that much. It's the decline, it can happen, and everyone's different. There's no rules to any of this, but my own experience, not just my mom, but in other people who I've tried to help, is it can be the same for quite a period, and then it goes down, and then it's the same again. So we really look now at this longer term data that we have, because the drugs have been on the market now for 4 or 5 years. And what we thought would happen does happen. The decline continues to grow. It continues to grow if someone gets the drug at an early enough stage, and if someone stays on it. Those are 2 big ifs. Okay, third was side effects. That's really super important, obviously. So there are side effects from these 2 drugs, just like any drugs. And they can be asymptomatic, just something that's going on, or they can actually be symptomatic, and even in some very rare cases, even fatal. The most important side effect is that some people, a small number of people, but if it was your mom or dad, it wouldn't really matter. You can get brain bleeds. So when these people go on these drugs, it's not like a drug the doctor gives you an antibiotic and says, I'll see you in a month. No, you're getting CAT scans, repeated scans to make sure that the person is not suffering from a brain bleed. So thanks, those were great. A brain bleed? Yeah, right.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation.
Your name.
Getting to that. My name is Amy Schussheim. And when I was a social worker at the Soldiers Home, we still had 5 World War I vets. And there were horses in World War I. And when we would get too close to one of the men with dementia, he would tell you, get away from my horse. And back in the 90s and early 2000s, the common thinking was when you hear somebody's delusion or, well, whatever the word is, that the irrational thought, you don't contradict them. We didn't tell them you're not on a horse.
Right.
So I wondered, my first question is that still the common perception that you don't dissuade the person from the irrational thought? My second question is, as a survivor of 2 cancers, I'm wondering how chemo, radiation, and microplastics affect the progression, if there's any interaction in terms of the plaque building.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Those are 2 great questions. So, I mean, again, I'm a volunteer. I'm not you're a social worker. You have more training in all of this than I do. Yeah, absolutely. 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 My mother-in-law was a social worker. So, you try to do whatever is going to work, and having an argument with the person that it's not his horse would seem like right off the top of my head, absolutely not going to work and only going to make things worse. And so I would say in general, the advice is still what you were talking about. It's just hard. I'd like to remember my mom with Alzheimer's out of the way, just remember her the way she was. She was a very different person with Alzheimer's, and, how to deal with it. I mean, it's all situational. But yeah, having a big argument with someone who has dementia seems like a very bad idea. So I don't know. I've never seen any research about chemotherapy and radiation having an impact on Alzheimer's. That's something I'll have to look at. Yeah.
Which one?
The woman in red and black.
Hi, I'm Carol Wilson. Closer, thank you, Sid. I just had a few comments based on my personal experience. If you have a chance, if you don't have it, to get long-term disability insurance, I know that really helped me in treating my husband. I was able to employ people who came to the home, who become friends with you, and you don't have the awful expense of paying full price for someone. Secondly, the Jewish Social Services Agency of Montgomery County, and I'm sure elsewhere, they have groups of Alzheimer's patients, and it's a wonderful thing to have that camaraderie. And as you said, there's a tendency to isolate yourself, and they do a wonderful job. So I was glad that I had access to those resources.
Thanks. And then after this one, I think there's some Zoom questions on the Zoom. So
We will get that.
not yet.
Hi, Arlene Lutenager. I'm wondering, I know you're a volunteer, but I'm wondering if you know of any research that's connecting Alzheimer's to as a gut disease. There are some other neurological diseases that they think begins in the gut. And
so do know there's a lot of research into that. I don't think that there are that many answers yet, but that you put your finger on a major area of research.
Okay, because your slide indicated that a change in diet reduced, I don't know if it's the onset or
Yeah.
the progression
Yeah.
of Alzheimer's, and
Yeah.
whether that's an indication that it might be a gut disease.
That's a great point. I know it's a major area of research, and as much as we know about Alzheimer's, there are still so many things we don't know. Yeah.
I think I get to go first.
Yeah, please, Jerry.
We do have a question on Zoom, and
Yeah.
it's from Jolie. And she says, am I at increased risk of developing Alzheimer's because my mom has Alzheimer's and vascular dementia? Do we know if there is a hereditary component, or is it primarily impacted by lifestyle? And she just has a further little comment.
Mm-hmm.
I recommend podcasts for caregivers, specifically the Alzheimer's Association podcast and the University of South Florida Caregiver podcast. They've both been helpful to me.
Okay, so first off, tell Jody thanks for that. And there is absolutely a genetic aspect to Alzheimer's. And so let me explain it. Just because my mom had Alzheimer's, that does not mean I'm getting Alzheimer's. My brothers could never be convinced about that, but it doesn't mean that. So there is a gene called APOE4. Okay, and we know that APOE4 has a relationship with Alzheimer's. So if you have one APOE4 gene, you are at increased risk of getting Alzheimer's as compared to the general population. It still doesn't mean you're going to get it, but whatever the chances are for someone who doesn't have it, substantially more if you have one of those genes. If you have two APOE4 genes, you have like a 95% chance of getting Alzheimer's. So now people usually say to me, well, can I get a test to see whether I have APOE4? So there is such a test. Almost no doctor will recommend it. And the reason why is because, remember, I said that we give the drugs to people who have the buildup of the amyloid. That's what the drugs do. So just because you are at risk, unless you have the high amyloid, there's nothing we can do for you. There's nothing that the doctor would do for you. Now, remember, I also said that the drugs are being tested right now for people who have the high amyloid but aren't symptomatic yet. And if that works, then I think that will just change the whole field, and it will bring in many, many more people who are not just at risk, but are in the process of developing Alzheimer's. And at that point, I think the genetic test will become part of every standard, exam. You go to the doctor, you say, yeah, my mom had Alzheimer's. And the doctor said, when they say cholesterol and diabetes and all that, they'll check off, yeah, let's do the genetic test for Alzheimer's. But we aren't quite there yet.
Sid Booth, who are the partners of ALZ, and what are the politics among the manufacturers of medications, the doctors, and all of this? Give us a little insight from inside the Beltway.
Yeah, so thanks for that, Sid. Great question. So the Alzheimer's Association has many partners. They have partners in the corporate community. Edward Jones, the brokerage firm, gives the Alzheimer's Association like $5 million a year. They're incredible. There are other partners just kind of across the board in almost every, especially in retail. There's a long list of companies that support the Alzheimer's Association. The politics of Alzheimer's are fascinating. Were fascinating to me when I first got involved. So, Alzheimer's doesn't care if you're a Republican or you're a Democrat, right? Alzheimer's hits everyone. And so traditionally, the Alzheimer's Association in our lobbying, especially in our lobbying for NIH funding, okay, we have had historically absolute bipartisan support. So the Alzheimer's Association is actually a new group, Sid, in the sense of it was founded in 1985. It isn't, that old. And when we started a 501c4 lobbying organization, NIH spent about $400 or $500 million a year on Alzheimer's research. And we had to compete with all the other diseases. And during the Obama administration, there were some transformational changes. And one of them is that the scientists at NIH submit the budget directly to Congress. Here's the amount of money we need to find a cure for Alzheimer's in the next 5 years. Only cancer and AIDS have that deal. Everyone else has to go through OMB, and then then there's no way to lobby because the congressman or woman says, well, I'm sorry about Alzheimer's, but I have a long list of diseases here. No, when we lobby, we say, hey, this is the money that the NIH scientists say. So as a result, NIH funding has gone from $500 million a year to $3.8 billion a year. The Trump folks are trying to make terrible change, and Kennedy are trying to make terrible changes to that. And one of the things that they're doing is they know we have bipartisan support for that top line number. So they have played this game. All these research studies are multiple years. They're like 5 or 10 year projects. And normally they would apply each year for renewal of their funding. The Trump people came up with this new model. So they allocate 100% of all the years of funding in the first year. And so they have funded about 50% less research, which is horrible. So Kennedy, if he were here, he would disagree with everything that I've said today, and he would have all of these. He has a million misconceptions about Alzheimer's. There's a famous clip where I'm watching him testify in the hearing room, and I'm like going like this. Yeah, I'm going like this, yeah. So the drug companies, we have a kind of complex set of relationships with. We need them to keep going ahead with what they're doing. But of course, we don't want them to charge as much as they want to charge. We're totally not interested in them making huge profits. That, we want the drugs to cost as little as possible. We want them to focus their efforts on underserved communities. We want the clinical trials to have more women than men. More women are getting the disease. Why are there clinical trials for Alzheimer's? They're all men. It's totally ridiculous. So we agree with them and we're connected with them. We talk to them all the time, and yet we have these areas of difference. Okay, other questions? David Diskin.
Thanks, Dean. David Diskin. So first of all, I don't think you have Alzheimer's because you answered Russ's you remembered Russ's 3 questions, which I'm not sure I could have done.
Thank you. Thank you.
That was great. So for years and years, we've been hearing about research into drugs that are going to do something, and it's been pretty weak so far. Are you familiar with Dale Bredesen's protocol? It might be related to that one slide where you talked about lifestyle. I mean, it's lifestyle, it's diet. I think it might be ketogenic. I'm not sure.
I've seen the name Dale Bredesen.
Well, what's interesting about it is they've shown that it not only stops the decline, but it actually reverses the disease. And I just wondered if you could comment.
So there was a CNN documentary with Sanjay Gupta talking about that. And I think that it was a phase 2, to be fair, it was what we call a phase 2 trial. So it actually wasn't the full, the big trial is the phase 3, which I think they're in the process of. Look, if they can reverse Alzheimer's, I'll be in the cheering section. I'll be sending out emails about it. So we'll see what happens. There's no question they're onto something. That again, there is science that supports these lifestyle improvements have a direct impact. Whether it actually can reverse Alzheimer's, who knows? Yep.
Thank you. Cecilia Weinheimer. And I was really first going to ask, is this a first world problem? Do people outside our rich environment develop Alzheimer's?
100%. We sponsor research in 56 countries around the world.
Okay.
The number one place of prevalence for Alzheimer's is China. And India is not far behind. So this is not a first world problem. This Alzheimer's is everywhere. China, and then India. So
And
Alzheimer's is not a first world problem.
are they number one numerically or by
As a
percentage?
percentage also. And by the way, in fairness to the Chinese government, not that I'm such a big fan of theirs, they fund more, they're number two right after NIH in terms of funding research. And when the Trump people came in and they put restrictions on international cooperation among scientists, that really hurt Alzheimer's because there's almost all of our research is global. Yeah.
Red or black?
Red. But by the way, I'm doing this in a completely if I haven't called you, please don't take it personally.
Nancy Raskin.
Yeah.
And I have two questions if I can remember them. But one, sleep.
Yeah.
As people get older, they can't sleep. And, I just wondered if there have been studies related to sleep, whether this does more damage or does something.
Yes, absolutely. Sleep, there's a direct correlation between not getting enough sleep regularly. This isn't like, I stayed up late one night to watch a basketball game, but people who regularly don't get enough sleep, there's a lot of research that says that that's related to Alzheimer's. And that's one of the biggest lifestyle improvements in the study that I talked about, was making sure people got 8 hours of sleep. Yes.
I don't think I qualify. My second question had to go back to the genetic component. Because I was trying to relate, I have a high risk for cancer, and I did go through genetic testing to see if I had the BRCA gene and so on. And I know that they're discovering new genes all the time, but you happen to say that there actually is a gene that was discovered.
Yes.
So I just wondered why that isn't more of a focus for people who have possibly the genetic component, and why they couldn't take advantage of that.
Yeah, so it is really a lack of information, and there's so many misconceptions about Alzheimer's. There's such a stigma around Alzheimer's, which is a big reason why I'm grateful that 50 of you decided to come today. It's like not necessarily such a fun, cool topic. So I think the other reason is that, in the medical community, I think especially primary care doctors, there's nothing they can do for someone who has the APOE4 gene. There's no course of treatment. So it's important information, but it doesn't kind of lead anywhere. So primary care doctors who are busy, who are just, checking the boxes with so many things on their plate, I think they just don't tell people about it.
Barbara Christie. I heard that if there was a very early symptom about olfactory symptom, if you lost, and I don't know if it's a myth, if you lost your sense of smell early in life, that was an indicator. Is that a myth?
Yeah, I'm really not aware of any. I'm a little reluctant to say flat out it's a myth, but I will just say, in my years here of dealing with Alzheimer's, never really heard much about that.
I also wanted to share that I had just learned that you can add to your DNR an Alzheimer's codicil. I don't know what it's called. So you can say, if I get Alzheimer's, at what stage and what you want.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that would be very tricky in the real world, but interesting. Yeah. Okay, who hasn't asked a question all the way over there?
I'm thinking just maybe one more question.
All right.
Okay, but if you've had your hand up, but everyone else come up to me. I'm stay here as long as it takes to answer every question. I don't get paid by the hour. It's fine.
Thank you, Peter Gluck. I was curious to look at the 10 warning signs. And I think the thing that struck me the most is that so many of them are associated with just aging. I mean, we forget things, we do all kinds of these. So how is a son or a daughter who's taking care of a parent who's getting older and exhibiting some of these warning signs, how are they supposed to differentiate between the warning signs being just a function of getting older or being a function of early stage Alzheimer's?
So Peter, that is a great question. And that is at the nuclear reactor core of this whole issue about early detection of Alzheimer's. And if it's certainly not mathematical, like I can't say precisely, but what I would say is it's the changes in those factors. It's when someone exhibits one of those factors and it's just dramatically out of character. You know, my mom, and this is very common with Alzheimer's, she called me like 10 times in a row to ask the same question. That's very common. Or she had this series of financial, mishaps that were totally out of character. So now this is just, me, Dean Brenner speaking, but, I would say above all, in looking at the 10 factors, it's something that's changed in one of those, that's out of character for the person, that isn't something that you've just seen for years and years. But, that is, and when in doubt, ask, when in doubt, speak up. I mean, which is hard. And in my family was extraordinarily hard, and I'm still kind of paying a price for it. But, it is better to err on the side of speaking up, of going to the doctor with someone, of suggesting, hey, I'm not accusing you of anything. This is not anything like that, but I think we should do something. But, that's very easy for me to say. And in my family, as I say, I'm still kind of paying a price for speaking up. And I think that's very common. So like, you really put your finger on one of the hardest things about Alzheimer's, which is, and if you ask the person's always going to say, you're crazy, I'm fine. What are you talking about? It's normal aging. So, I would say, though, to look for a change in one of those 10 as kind of the linchpin. But, this is not mathematical. This is, a touch and a feel.
What about a cognitive assessment?
So every doctor, primary care doctor, as part of Medicare, is supposed to be doing those every year for you. And, it's short. It's the tests that probably a lot of you have had, where they ask you they mention 3 words, they keep talking to you, 5 words maybe, and then about 3 minutes later, they ask you to repeat them back. But that's supposed to be done in your annual exam under Medicare. Of course, primary care doctors, they're busy. They don't always do that, but that is what they're supposed to do.
I think we're done.
Okay.
You're not.
Thanks.
Thank you, Dean. It was wonderful. Ladies, don't